It's time for another Q&A, and I have 8 fantastic questions from you all that I am excited to get into. But if you're new here, my name's James. I run kibblewatches.co.uk, where I buy and sell watches. So I am a watch dealer, and this Q&A is focused around asking a watch dealer questions, whether it be about business, watches, personal life, whatever it might be. I will endeavour to answer them as honestly as I possibly can without getting into too much trouble, which is always the goal here. Now, as always, down in the description of this video, you'll see every single question listed, as well as a timestamp, so you can skip to that specific question if you're only here to see the answer to one of them, or just want to see what is in this week's episode. You can do so via that. And if you'd like your question answered in this episode, there's a few ways you can go about it. You can leave a comment in this video. That's often the easiest way, because then I can take it straight on for the next episode. Or you can email me, info@kibblewatches.co.uk, with your question. And if you want to remain anonymous or have an abbreviation or just your first name, whatever it might be, please state that, so obviously I don't say your full name or your YouTube handle name. Just make that clear for me. Now, before we crack on with the questions, what's on wrist? I am wearing a wonderful Studio Underdog. This is the smoked salmon, so it has no branding on the dial, and this was only accessible to existing customers. And I think it's the one that they sold the least amount of the 2 variants. I could be wrong on that, but it's a really cool one and I really enjoy it. I've struggled to find straps that really suit it, but I think this Boolang & Son strap looks fantastic on it. Let me know down in the comments what you think, but it is a very, very fun watch that I enjoy. Question number 1 is from DD. He says, you mentioned in a previous Q&A you aim to make around 12% margin when selling a watch, but I can't see how this adds up on watches you sell under £500. Great question, and we're getting straight into it. So I did say in a previous episode that we aim to make around 12% margin. Now, just to clarify, that is really 12% overall. So as I believe I said anyway in that question, or the answer to the previous question, the 12% is kind of the average. So some watches I will make a lot more, some watches I will make a lot less, and some watches I'll even lose on. That's the case across the board. But you are 100% right to make the assumption that that doesn't work on watches under 500 or even 1,000, and even just a bit more than that, to be completely honest with you, because as you can imagine, making 12% on a £10,000 watch is a lot different to making 12% on a £500 watch, just from a mathematical basis, but also it just wouldn't work out. We have to pay margin scheme VAT and all the associated costs, which we've talked about in a different Q&A as well. All those things have to come off that margin we make when we sell a watch. Therefore, making just £40 on a watch, as much as I have done it and will continue to do it from time to time, it just doesn't make sense. So you're 100% right, and it's why certain times you will see I don't have as many of the affordable watches as I used to, because I just can't buy them with enough margin to make it work. And if you've ever sat across from me and we've done a deal, or you've ever sold me a watch that's within that bracket, 9 times out of 10, I will literally tell you what I'm going to list it for and what I think you will get for it if you sell it privately. And I make it very clear, you will get more selling it privately. It's just a lot of people, surprisingly to some people out there, don't want to go and sell it privately. They don't want the hassle, they haven't got the time, or they just want to actually sell it to myself or a dealer or whatever it might be, whatever the circumstances are. But yes, on some of those affordable watches, doubling up is actually not uncommon. So for a £500 watch, if I can pay £250 for it and list it for 500, it doesn't necessarily mean I'll sell it for 500, but that kind of ratio, of course, that's what I'm going to try and aim for, because whilst that sounds insane that I'm doubling up on a watch, when you really take it apart and say, okay, you made £250 on that watch, but 20% is VAT of that £250, so £50 immediately is gone. That leaves you 200, and then you do the math. I do the same level of photography for that £500 watch as I do for the £10,000 watch. We put the same effort into the description. We ship it out free of charge, just like any other watch, which comes off the cost. You know, it can be £12, £15 for shipping alone. So you can really see how all of a sudden that insane figure of doubling up really doesn't end up being that crazy. So hopefully that makes sense. And as always, on those affordable watches, if you want to sell it yourself, that's where you're going to get the best results. Just, you know, there is the other option again and gone, or in some cases I buy, you know, a small collection of watches. So someone will come to me with 10 or 15 of these affordable watches, and I will be buying them with those kind of margins in mind. But that person gets rid of all those watches in one go and often part exits for another watch or whatever it might be. Hopefully that makes sense, and sort of clarifies that yes, 12% is the average we try and make, but some watches we are going to make more. Question number 2 is from Mark. As someone who has collected modern watches for 10 years, should I get into vintage, and what do I need to be aware of? Fantastic question, something I am asked often. So If you've been collecting modern watches for 10 years, I assume you're very familiar with just watches in general. So I don't need to bore you on the mechanics and this and that. But what you do need to keep in mind is, depending on how old the watch is, and if we're going vintage, we're going to say probably 70s at least, if not 60s or 50s or even 40s, right? And we can obviously go all the way back to trench watches and beyond. But let's say 70s or even 60s. Or 50s, we could keep going. With those watches, you need to adjust your mindset when wearing. And now what I mean by that is if you're wearing a watch that's only 4 years old, let's say, you can expect that watch to do everything it's advertised to do when it was sold to you 4 years ago. Whereas a watch from the 1970s, even if it's chronometer rated, for example, you can't always assure that you're going to get that after that amount of time. It's what's a good analogy for this? Let's say miles per gallon in a car, right? I don't know how, I'm sure there's a way to test these things, but I'm not a car person. It's probably a terrible analogy. I'm going to get slated online forever for this. But let's say a modern car has its miles per gallon stated, and you can assume you're going to get somewhere around that miles per gallon. Whereas a car in the 1970s was described as having X amount of miles per gallon. Nowadays, you're not going to get that same efficiency because just things wear down, you know, you service, you replace, you look after it, but it's not going to be as efficient as it was when it was first made. This is the case for everything. Your kettle, you know, everything doesn't operate the day like it did the day it was made. Hopefully that makes sense. So therefore you have to adjust your mindset. If it's torrential rain outside and you're going to be out all day getting absolutely drenched, probably best not to wear a vintage watch. If you're going to be at the playground with your kids and it's going to be a bit rough and tumble and you know, there's a risk you're going to be knocking it about, again, depending on the watch, you might not want to wear that watch when you do these things. So these are just certain aspects you have to keep in mind. Adjust your mindset when wearing vintage and when collecting vintage. But I would say absolutely get into vintage. It's probably one of the most rewarding sides of collecting, in my opinion, and it has been for me. As much as I love modern watches, I get the most enjoyment out of hunting and finding those particular vintage watches and wearing them, of course. You know, I'm fortunate. I work in an office every day. I travel in on train. You know, I haven't really got to worry too much about rough and tumble or any of those things. But when it comes to the weekend and I'm at the playground with my kids, I'm typically not wearing a vintage watch. So that's what I would say. And just quickly on top of that, obviously it goes without saying, originality, buy from reputable places so you get a warranty, especially if you're new into it. I would recommend buying from someone like myself or Fathom Watches or Subdial, wherever it might be. There are fantastic places out there that do vintage very well, give you a warranty, provide you all of the reassurances you need, and will talk you through all these things as well. Whereas if you're just hunting on eBay because you're looking for a good deal, you may get stung because you might find a watch for £300, but it may need a service that's the equivalent of £300 because service costs aren't dictated particularly by the value of the watch. The work required is still the same on a £300 watch as it is on a £30,000 time-only watch if we're comparing apples to apples. Again, hopefully that makes sense. Question number 3 is from this chap. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. I've said it about 13 different ways already, so I apologize. Thank you for the question and thank you for the kind words as well that you had. But the question is, what lessons of the trade have you learned the hard way? Fantastic question. Every single thing I've learned in the trade, I've kind of learned the hard way. I didn't go to business school. I didn't do any like advanced things on business or any of those things, or obviously the watch trade, not that such a thing exists. So everything I've learned through actually doing, and I think it's the best way that I learn personally. It's not for everyone, but just sort of getting your hands in the mud and figuring it out as you go. So when it came to first having to do VAT, you know, I was over the VAT threshold by a reasonable amount before I realized there was such a thing as a VAT threshold. So I got slapped with a little fine, and that's the lesson learned there, right? Getting an accountant to do all the right accounting and bookkeeping and things like this. All these things you learn through time, and keeping sort of track of everything, having a stock sheet, invoicing, you know, all the basic things we take for granted. When you are just starting out, you realize, you know, you sell a watch and that person goes, perfect, can I have an invoice? And you go, yeah, of course you can. And you have to make an invoice. So again, this is the way I've learned. One of the things I would say I've learned the hardest, and thankfully I didn't have anything too drastic, but it's security. You know, and just doing things the right way. Early days when I first started, obviously I didn't have a premise, and I used to travel around with watches. I used to meet people in coffee shops, you know, meet them at the house or whatever it might be, or a convenient local place, a bank area, a hotel lobby, you know, all these kind of things. And that was okay back then. I was sort of a nobody, and I was young, I didn't have a family, you know, the things weren't running through my head that would run through my head immediately doing those kind of things. And there are still dealers out there who operate that way, and I'm not saying anything bad about that, but for me, I learned the hard way through a couple of unfortunate situations that could have been way worse than what they were, that, you can't do those kind of things. It's not safe, it's not secure, you're putting yourself in a very risky position, and also it's not safe and secure for the person you're selling to. If you're sat in a coffee shop doing a deal, there are people sat there who will see that kind of thing, and the reality is there's a lot of bad people out there, especially in London, unfortunately, who track these kind of things. They have WhatsApp groups where they talk and they say, hey, I've just seen this person. They'll send photos. There's a lot of really crazy things that happen. So now I operate exclusively in the office. I don't travel out to do deals anymore. I don't meet people anywhere. Everything is done here under my cameras and my security systems and everything like that. We ask for ID before you come if we've never dealt, those kind of things. That's what I've learned the hardest way, I would say. And I think to anyone out there who wants to get into the trade, take security seriously, get insured properly, do all these things, because as much of a ball ache as it is, it's the best way to do it, because then you can go home at night and sleep, especially if you've got a family. Not that that matters too much, but I want to go back home to my kids, right? I don't want to constantly be looking over my shoulder worrying about how I'm operating. So that's what I would say to that. Question number 4 is from Chris Thorne 7565. He asks, generally speaking, would you recommend buying from the bottom end of the better brand or the top end of a lesser brand at a similar price point? For example, buying a time-only, fairly simple Moser, Langer, Patek, etc., compared to something more technical, with more technical prowess from JLC, Grand Seiko, etc. Really great question, and actually quite an interesting one. He asked me if he said I could reword that how I thought, but I thought he asked that perfectly there. Just it is a long question. So what he's essentially asking, as in case you didn't get it, is do you buy your entry-level Langer, or do you spend an equivalent amount to get the top-end JLC of the similar price point? And it's a very interesting question, because obviously I'm going to give you the short answer, which is which one do you prefer more? If you've got the same money, go for that one. That's the obvious answer, but when it comes down to it, it's a tricky one, because there is something to be said about getting an entry-level Langer or entry-level Patek. If you can get a really nice Calatrava, it really is something special. But if you're someone who appreciates complication, then getting a JLC triple calendar moon phase or Master Geographic or something like that may be a better option, because you are getting a hell of a lot more for your money when you consider it. But it depends on where your values lie of what you appreciate. So for example, if you are someone who's just all about finishing, brand history and equity and all those kind of things, a Patek Calatrava may speak more to you. But if you're someone who really appreciates technical prowess and something that delivers an insane bang for your money, then again, going down that Grand Seiko route or JLC or something like that can offer a lot. But it is a tricky one. So I can't really give you a straight answer, because there's scenarios where it would very much depend on watch by watch basis, where I would probably go for a Patek Calatrava over something like a complicated JLC, but there's other scenarios where I may go with the complicated JLC over a different kind of Patek. It varies. So hopefully that answers your question. It probably doesn't. I'll probably just given you the answer you already knew, but it's a very interesting question. Let me know down in the comments, and that might be a sort of conversation starter. What would you choose if you were in that scenario? Would you go with the entry level of a top brand, or go for the top end of an entry brand, or more attainable brand, if that makes sense? Let me know down in the comments. Question number 5, and funny enough, I forgot to read this one because it kind of associates back to a previous question, is from Richard. He says, James, we always hear about the dangers associated with luxury timepieces, especially in the capital, so just how much of a nightmare is security in your line of business? So it is very much a real factor and something we have to consider, and something that is thought about every day, unfortunately. Being a dealer, at the end of the day, we often get the list of what's been stolen, serial numbers to keep an eye out for, and being in the trade chats, if something happens to a dealer, they often put it straight in there, obviously after contacting authorities and anything like that, to state what's happened, share any video footage, faces of the people if they have it, those kind of things. So it's always being presented to us, right? We're always aware of what's happening, and the reality is it is happening a lot in London because it's just a capital city. These kind of things happen more often than not in capital cities. They still happen elsewhere, but it is a major problem. It has got worse over the years, and it is becoming more of a factor of customers, I've noticed, especially as I sell watches here in London. I hear regularly from people that they have X watch, but they don't wear it anymore in London unless they're out in the country where they live, maybe like the countryside, and they'll wear it there. So yes, it's a real factor. Yes, it's a real thing. Yes, you need to be cautious and careful. But as a collector, I would say don't let it cripple you. If it's becoming to a point where you are really thinking that much about it because you own X watch, I would really ask yourself, is it worth owning that watch anymore? And I know that's a sad reality because it almost lets these people win, but is it? You know, if this should be a fun hobby. So if it's causing that much distress and that much thought, sell those watches and go into something that makes you more comfortable. And I've had a lot of customers do that over the years. So that's my recommendation there. But as a dealer, yes, it's a real factor. Yes, we have to take a lot of thought into security measures. I've said it before, but insurance for me as a business is more expensive than my rent for this place, and that's just the nature of the kind of industry when we are insured properly, because it's a very serious factor for me. You know, as I said previously, I want to go home to my kids. I want to know when I lock up, everything is safe, secure, and insured. You know, it's even things like the safes. We have to get to a certain guideline of safe with a certain weight drilled into the floor and the wall if possible. And those kind of factors. So security cameras, you know, we have to have X amount covering every square footage we possibly can. Smoke, you know, if we are broken into, smoke that goes off. There's so many different things. Panic buttons, you know, a lot of people don't realize there's panic buttons all over the place. And if I push those, it's immediate call out of police. And again, I pay an extra fee a year for that kind of service. But these are all part of doing business in this industry, unfortunately. It's a high value good industry where a single safe can hold hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions of pounds, depending on the kind of dealer it is. So it's a very easy, quote, thing to kind of rob and get a huge kind of payout for. So yeah, it's a real factor, and it's not a very nice reality of the industry. But again, all of the great things of the industry outweigh it enough for me to obviously stick in it. Because if it was that risky, that my life was constantly at risk, obviously I personally wouldn't do it. I don't think it'd be worth it. But it's not quite to that level, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm just talking very honestly here about the realities of it. So hopefully that answers your question. Question number 6 is from Yates. He asks, what makes a watch dealer shady in your opinion? Great question. This industry is built on integrity and trust, and you know, your word is everything. If you commit to a watch, or you agree to a deal, you have to fulfill that. You know, if you back out on that, people will know. The trade will know, and you'll be shamed for it and kicked out of groups, and you know, your word will mean less. So that's a real factor. So therefore, the shady dealers are often the ones who try and tiptoe around those lines the best they can and sort of play games and do things that just aren't so great. Obviously, I can't talk too much, but I would say one very, very prominent thing that you see from time to time, and I've seen it myself, and it disappoints me, is dealers who will use age-old sale tactics that put a lot of pressure on a consumer to buy. For example, the age-old trying to do a deal, they negotiate a price and they say this only lasts for this 5 minutes or 5 seconds or nonsense like that. If someone's playing those kind of tactics, walk away. That's not someone you want to deal with. If they have to put that much pressure on you to buy a watch, that watch probably isn't the watch you should be buying. You know, a watch purchase should be a fun and enjoyable thing and something you want to do. If you don't want to do it, spend your money on other things. You know, a watch is not necessary, and obviously that's coming from someone who makes a living selling watches. I would much rather people walk away and think about a watch and come back to me to buy it after 24 hours or 48 hours of really considering it, speaking to their wife, whatever it might be, then buying a watch, walking away very unhappy, and then returning the watch down the road, because returns cost money, they cost time, it's inconvenient for everyone involved. So again, just go to dealers who are giving you the breathing room as opposed to the pressure. That's my thing. I think those are the shady dealers personally. And then question 7 is from Yates again. If someone wanted to get started selling watches, where would they possibly source watches, considering that they're just interested in making a small margin like a side hustle? So this is something I think I've spoken about before, but in terms of where would you source watches particularly, your best bet is probably forums and eBay when you're just getting started, because you don't have the sort of situation I have where I've been doing this for so long that I get offered 20, 30 watches every single day from private individuals and collectors. So I don't have to go hunting for watches anymore. They get offered to me and I sift through and choose what I want, basically. It's a very fortunate position that's taken a long time and a lot of work to get to. But when you're starting out, you don't have that. And when I started out, I definitely didn't have that. So I used to sit on the on the forums, like Watch You Seek has a sale section, and Christopher Ward forums, and there's so many watch forums out there, and there's so many watch groups you can sort of get into. That's a great place to look, because again, you're tapping into the collector base typically. eBay, again, another great one, but with all of these things, you've just got to be careful, because often you're paying for a watch before receiving it. Your returns, even with eBay, can be very difficult if there's anything wrong. So as always, do your due diligence, try and cover your bases, and try and buy things that aren't going to require a lot of work, because that is the killer to your profit. If you buy something that's vintage and it seems like a great deal, as I said previously, you can end up spending just as much as you paid for the watch, if not more, getting it fixed to be able to retail it. And obviously, if you're going to sell watches, you need to do that, because otherwise, if you're selling a dud and you're not claiming it to be a dud, then it's going to come and bite you on the arse down the road, because people won't buy from you. You know, it only takes selling one really bad watch knowingly for someone to post that on a forum, and that's your reputation gone. You know, if that happens, and then other people say, actually, I had a similar situation, it can spiral out of control. So just do the right thing from the get-go, especially if you're interested in doing this properly. Hopefully that answers your question. eBay and forums. Question number 8, and the final question today, comes from Colin. He says, as a collector, how would you decide which watches to sell from your collection? And he continues, and is there anything I should bear in mind from your dealer's perspective? Whoa, interesting question. So as a collector, how would you decide which watches to sell from your collection? There's a couple of scenarios there. Obviously, if I have to sell, then it's a case of what can I sell the quickest to get the most money. You know, if I've got bills that need to be paid that all of a sudden are snuck up or something like that, you know, those are scenarios. But if I'm just generally looking at my collection, my thought process is I would rather sell the things first that I can replace the easiest, because the reality is, if it's in your collection, you probably like it or liked it, and if you ever regret that, you want to know you can get it back. For example, if I have a Hamilton khaki field Murph in my collection, if I was to sell something, that would probably be the first to go, because if I decided that was a mistake, I could buy one back very easily. Whereas my vintage Mido, that's possibly a piece unique, something like that, if I sell, I'm not going to be able to get it back unless I can buy it back from the person I sold it to. So my thought process is always sell the things you can attain back easiest, and keep the things that are very hard to get the longest you can. So hopefully that answers that part of the question. And then, is there anything you should bear in mind from my perspective as a dealer? I assume you mean when offering a watch. I would probably say it links to multiple of the questions we've spoken about. So if it's a more affordable watch that you're offering to a dealer specifically, not a private collector, keep in mind the margins they have to make. So I have dealt with a lot of customers, and Colin, you're actually one of them, who I've dealt with for many years, and you understand that side of the world. So you come to me already with an offer, and maybe we'll negotiate, or maybe it's a fair offer from the get, and we'll close a deal. So have a price in mind, is what I would say. First and foremost, have a price in mind. If you want to sell a watch, you probably have a rough idea of what you want to get for it. Otherwise, you're just punching thin air. It doesn't make any sense to me personally, but hey, so have a price in mind, because as a dealer, when you get offered so many watches, the people who have given you a price often are the most serious, because they're giving you a price, but also you have somewhere to work with. You have a basis, you know where they're at, and you can go back and forth with that. Or again, if it's a fair offer, you can close a deal. So have a price in mind, and you know, have things ready like service history, and understand if it's, you know, over 6, 7, 8 years old and it's not been serviced, there's a risk factor there. So again, we're going to probably want to account in a service, or at least having it fully checked over by a watchmaker. All these things cost money, and they add on to what we're going to have to pay for the watch overall. So keep those things in mind. Anything else? No, I would say that's it. Come with a price in mind, have all the details ready to hand, have photos ready, and make sure it's actually yours. And I'm not talking to you particularly, Colin, I'm just talking in general. I have been offered so many watches over the years where we've agreed a deal and they're like, perfect, I can go pick it up next Thursday. And it's like, what do you mean pick it up? Well, I haven't bought it yet. And it's like, don't negotiate a deal on a watch you don't own, because if you don't own it, things can change, things can go wrong. And as a dealer, when we agree a deal, we're associating that capital to that deal. Therefore, we might still have the money in our account, but we're already ruling it out as it's going out there. So we may turn away other deals. So please do not secondary deal watches like that if you do not own them, or do not have them in your possession right there and then to make the deal happen. You know, it's one thing if you're, you know, negotiating on behalf of your mum or dad, these things happen 100%. But if you've been offered a watch from your AD and you're already trying to sell it, it's just not a good look and it doesn't work out very well. Or even from another dealer, I've had that before, where a private individual is trying to negotiate with me on a watch that's with a dealer I know that they've not bought yet. They're trying to do like a Part X deal and sell me the watch the other dealer already has, which I could go to the dealer for and get probably a better price, but hey. So keep that in mind. That was just a little random ramble at the end. But yes, I hope you all enjoyed it. I've tried to answer these questions as honestly as I can. The thing with these Q&As is some of the questions are obviously very pointed and maybe a bit leading in some scenarios. So I'm answering them as honestly as I can without getting too much in the shit, because at the end of the day, I'm in the industry, I have friends and connections, I have a reputation to uphold. I do not want to squander everything by saying the wrong thing, but at the same time, I want to give you guys and girls who watch this a real inside look of what it's like on this side of the table, if you will. So yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I look forward to seeing what the questions are for the next episode, and we'll see you all again next week. Take care.